Awesome. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Wherever you're joining from, welcome to today's webinar. Like I said, the live music we just heard was played by Solange M. Salem. Thank you so much, Solange, for not only custom composing music for CWC in the past, but also coming here and playing this soothing music live for all of us today. We appreciate you. And this is the second special session of ICC's Crack the Wellness Code in 2021 after conducting an amazing string of over 100 online sessions post-COVID alone. We are delighted to have launched the CWC's Behavioral Health Forum last month. Today's topic helps people attain something that all of us want: happiness. The title of today's presentation is The Science of a Happy Brain. Today, we'll be talking about cutting-edge research in brain science for a happy brain, spiritual wisdom that you can apply for better mental health and resilience, and strategies and tools that you can effectively deploy for you and for the community around you to stay happy and healthy. This event is brought to you by Crack the Wellness Code, a program of ICC India Community Center, North America's largest secular community center for South Asians, serving the community for over 17 years. For those of you who just joined, my name is Praveen Nara. I'm an event coordinator for CWC and Thai Global. I'm the founder and CEO of TechDatas, a digital transformation and custom software development company. And tonight, we have audience joining us from multiple countries on both sides of the planet, from India, Australia, Canada, and of course, the United States. And I'd like to thank the people. Let me actually move to the next slide. I'd like to thank the people who made this event possible and who have been working for CWC for years now. The co-founders of CWC who are with us today, Dr. Pankaj Vij, Naren Bakshi, and Somnath Chatterjee. I also would like to thank Raj Desai, CEO of ICC, for giving us this platform. And tonight, we have an awesome panel of experts in the field of brain health and happiness. And our guest speakers today are Gopi Kalail, and our lead speaker is Dr. Jay Kumar. Both of them are well-known experts in the field of happiness, and they are super talented. To introduce them, I'll be inviting Dr. Pankaj Vij, who is the co-founder of CWC. And normally our events used to be 60 minutes, but they usually used to go over because audience always have more questions. They were enthusiastic and participated a lot. So we extended this event for 90 minutes so that you can participate more freely with our panelists today. So feel free to use this extra time, ask a lot of questions, and get the questions that you specifically have about you and about your friends answered so that you can apply these techniques and strategies in your business. CWC is an ecosystem of entrepreneurs, professionals, health practitioners dedicated to cracking their wellness code by embracing evidence-based lifestyle, diet, and wellness best practices. CWC offers several programs, both online and offline, and you can visit crackthewellnesscode.org/all events and register for events of your choice. We have events for seniors, youngsters, entrepreneurs, and also for local communities. And I'm glad to inform you that since COVID started, like I said, we've done more than 100 online events. And this is a huge testimony to our commitment to wellness as a long-term player and a dedicated giver to you and to the community around you. And to continue the wellness movement of this magnitude, your generous contributions matter a lot to us. So I invite you, you will see a link on this page, crackthewellnesscode.org/donate to donate for this very genuine and useful cause. By donating, you will not only help us run these programs, but also build content and work on digital projects to support you. CWC's wellness movement is only accelerating with great plans for 2021 and beyond to embrace your needs. whether you are a tech professional, entrepreneur, senior, youth, a health hero, a doctor, a service provider, or a wellness champion, we are here to serve you. And it takes just a couple of clicks to donate. And on top of that, CWC is part of ICC, which is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. So you will also get a tax credit for your donations. And we will soon be announcing universal membership program at CWC in the second quarter of 2021. And we are really excited about that because a lot of people have been asking about it. They want to get more from the experts in the field, and they want to improve their life by implementing a lot of these things that they're learning. And this program will help them for that. And as you may already know, we are working on multiple projects and we are looking for volunteer leaders. Soumya, one of my CWC's colleagues, is going to provide the details on chat on how you can participate and become a volunteer leader in this community. And we'll also be offering micro-learning courses in the coming months as well. So stay tuned for that as well. And I'm happy to inform you that we've built a very strong backend team in India in the last several months. And they're doing a fantastic job in not only uploading the videos to YouTube, helping with newsletter marketing, creating graphics, building apps, and so many things to serve you guys better. So we are really investing in serving you. And we are also building a new CWC Wellness Resource Center in India for these activities. So as you can guess, there's a lot happening and there are a lot of people working behind the scenes to serve you. And I'm happy to inform you that this event is being brought to you in collaboration with Thai Global, the world's largest entrepreneurial organization with over 60 chapters across the globe. And so this is the agenda for today. I'm first going to invite Dr. Pankaj Vij. He is going to introduce and invite our panelists. And then we'll have Q&A once the panel's presentations are done. And so please use your Q&A effectively to get your answers answered, okay? And the best way to do that is there's a Q&A window. If you see at the bottom, you'll see Q&A window. So click on that and enter all your questions there. There's also a chat. Please don't ask questions in the chat because it's harder for me to moderate and also to track which questions have been answered. So please use Q&A window for that. And I need to share this disclaimer due to compliance and regulations. So just see those disclaimers. And with that out of the way, let's jump into the webinar. So let me introduce you to Dr. Pankaj Vij. Dr. Vij is the president of AAPIO, American Association of Physicians of Indian Origin. He's a co-founder and doctor patron at CWC ICC. Pankaj is also a board member of American College of Lifestyle Medicine and author of the book Turbo Metabolism. Pankaj will introduce and invite panelists. Pankaj, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Praveen. I can't even begin to describe how excited I am about today's event, especially with these stars that are talking to us today. And the topic is so relevant considering what a stressful year 2020 has been. This pandemic has wreaked havoc on mental health and behavioral issues ranging from depression to anxiety, loneliness, suicide have gone up exponentially in the last year. So we're super excited to have Dr. Jay Kumar, and I'm even more excited, sorry Jay, but I have to say this, I'm even more excited to be introducing Gopi, who will introduce you. I met Gopi about 4 years ago at Wisdom 2.0. And the moment I saw him, I knew that this guy is a gem. And he says this jokingly, but it's true. I have clung on to him since then. It was exactly 4 years ago. I ran to the bookstore at Wisdom 2.0 and bought his first book, From the Internet to the Internet. And he signed it for me. I read it several times and I loved it so much. And one of my favorite lines from Gopi is that the cell phone is the 79th organ of the body. As a physician, I only knew that there were 78 organs, but he taught me that the cell phone is the 79th organ of the body. He has 2 MBAs. He's probably one of the smartest people that I know and one of the ones that I admire the most. He's the chief evangelist of brand marketing at Google, where we have had at least one event for Crack the Wellness Code, which was a super success with some of our other friends at Google. But we're beyond excited and elated to have Gopi as someone who will help us as a brand ambassador for Crack the Wellness Code. Given his interest in resilience, in emotional health, and in mind-body wellness, he leads yoga retreats for Googlers, which he calls yogalers. Love to hear from him more about that. He's been doing resilience work with employees in the employee wellness section at Google, and many, many more activities with super smart and accomplished people all over the world. So without further ado, let me introduce my special friend, someone that I admire from the bottom of my heart and want to be more like, Gopi Pillai.
Thank you, Pankaj. Thank you for the very kind and warm introduction. I have to applaud the amazing work that ICC Crack the Wellness Code has done over the last 30 months. So led by this leadership team, that is Pankaj, Somnath, Naren, Praveen, etc. What started as this movement to bring the idea of holistic wellness in the San Francisco Bay Area has now become a global movement, as you can see from the incredible audience that has showed up from all over the world. And what I really admire and appreciate about Crack the Wellness Code is the whole philosophy of packaging mind-body wellness in a form that is easily consumed by the general population. To do that, you have to really do two things, and that has been their approach. First is you have to find that evidence-based, research-based proof that some things work and some things don't. And this is a science. Taking care of your mind, body, spirit is a science. And it's been well researched over the last 30, 40 years. And it is the kind of evidence Dr. Pankaj, with his medical background, has gone dug into and is laid out in his book as well as in the programming the Crack the Wellness Code brings. But it's one thing to know the theory. It's a whole other thing to be able to practice it, to actually incorporate into our life. And this is the thing that Crack the Wellness Code is also focused on with these series of webinars. And now they're building this app called Pushy to help us, much as we know these things. Bringing into daily practice is not easy. And later Dr. J will talk about the challenges of doing that. And why in some ways, we are even wired not to do the things that we know are good for us. Crack the Wellness Code has this incredible network of doctors, health heroes, health tech companies. But even more impressively, they partnered with other organizations, recognizing that if you're taking on this challenge of raising the overall wellness of the global population, then you need to partner with organizations around the world. And they really struck, besides ICC, which is the main sponsor of their organization, they also have partnership with iGlobal, with the South Asian Heart Center, Stanford Care, the University of Irvine Future Health Institute, True North, Human Center, etc. And I'm sure this will be just a fraction of what will emerge over the next several years or so. So before I introduce Jay, I wanted to share my own perspective on holistic wellness, particularly during the pandemic. And it's absorbed from things I learned from South Asian Heart Center, from Dr. Pankaj Vijay's book, from Dr. Jay Kumar, etc. And my formula now, which I would also share with you, is to give yourself medals every day. Give yourself medals every day. Now, what do I mean by give yourself medals? And it's not exactly like buying these little pieces of metal and hanging around your neck, but actually medals is a beautiful acronym, MEDALS, for what I have as a daily practice. And that is M for meditation, some type of spaciousness in your life. And Jay will talk about the benefits of that during his talk. E for exercise. Your body likes movement, our body needs movement. So pick whatever works for you, whether it's yoga or biking or swimming or interval training. D is for diet. And there again, both Pankaj and Jay will talk about and are big champions of plant-based whole food nutrition as the healthiest form of diet for the human body, along with water as the best beverage. So the D for diet. A is for appreciation. Live with an attitude of gratitude so that your mind, your brain, you shift its attention to the things that are working well in your life. L is for learning. Just like we need physical exercise, our brain needs mental exercise. You need to take it to the gym. And by trying to learn something new and complex every day, it works the brain in a certain ways and lays new neural pathways. And S is for sleep, and S is for some kind of a spiritual connection, some connection to something that's larger than us. So that's been my daily formula. Metals, M for meditation, E for exercise, D for diet or nutrition, A for appreciation or gratitude, L for learning, S for sleep, and S for some sort of a spiritual context in your life. But the best person to talk about a lot of these things is in the house, Dr. Jay Kumar, a dear friend of mine, and I'm delighted to introduce him. It's a privilege and honor. Dr. Jay Kumar is known as the happiness professor. This is what he teaches. He teaches happiness at Chapman University. But what gives him the credibility to teach that is that he's an applied brain science researcher and founded the Applied Brain Science Research Institute. And Jay has spent his entire life trying to understand this topic of happiness and specifically trying to understand what happens to our neurochemistry, what happens in our brain, what happens in our body when people are happy. And therefore, he's also, as an expert in behavioral psychology, he also tries to look at how can he change it, what habit changes or environmental changes we need to engineer in order to be happier. And this is what he talks about, and he went on to write about in this incredible book, one of my favorites, Science of a Happy Brain, that launched, I think, about 3 years ago, and is a bestseller. He teaches happiness at Chapman University. He's director of wellness at Chapman University. He's also got an incredible course on LinkedIn Learning on happiness. And I've had the privilege and honor of collaborating with Jay for many, many years and writing the foreword to his book. With that, let me introduce to you my dear friend, and in my opinion, one of the world's greatest experts on not simply happiness, but the neurochemistry of happiness, or what happens in our brain when we are happy, or what makes us happy. Dr. Jay Kumar.
Thank you so much, Gopi, and thank you to everyone here at Crack the Wellness Code ICC and also Thai Global for this amazing opportunity to really share with you some insights from my new book. I'll share my screen in just a moment with all of you, just a bit. But what I share with you is, like, I actually have a personal story about Gopi. So Dr. Pankaj Vij, I agree with you. Gopi is pretty amazing. He is big. He's a really fantastic person to talk about in general. But Gopi and I actually a year ago this week, Gopi came to Chapman University and gave, which I believe was his last public talk at Chapman University a year ago this week. And I was the one who introduced Gopi at that talk. So it's full circle that Gopi now is introducing me for this talk here on Science for Happy Brain. I'm going to share my screen with you right now, just to really, so we can start the presentation and to really begin to talk about some of the concepts that come from my book, the Science for Happy Brain. So I want to share with you what I believe are, Gopi said, I'm a happiness professor. When in high school, career counseling, there's no checkbox for a happiness professor. So how does somebody become a happiness professor? Well, I actually have been always interested in the brain and how spirituality and science converge to really help apply practices and tools for achieving well-being. But because we're talking about behavioral health, and because I know many people on this webinar have a South Asian background, one thing that we're really trying to do with Crack the Wellness Code is remove the stigma around mental health. So I want to share with you a personal story that really, I think, is the impetus that got me to write the book, Science for Happy Brain, and really begins to explore some of the deeper concepts that we can begin to recognize about how to cultivate deeper well-being. So what I'm going to say is, when I was 27, my mother died from suicide. It was a horrible, traumatic experience. I was something unexpected, but it was the impetus that got me to talk about and investigate the science of happiness. and really begin to write this book, Science of a Happy Brain, which I'll be talking about in great detail today. I also have an online course called Investing in Happiness, Improving Your Business and Work Through Brain Science. This really is topics from that online course I use when I present to Fortune 500 companies and to the corporate world. But what I want to say is we can begin to look at happiness through the lens of brain science research. We can begin to explore what I believe is why we have to really focus on happiness in our lives right now and the science behind it. So I want to kind of share with you what I believe that 2021 and 2020 has been a perfect stress storm. We have experienced fear and anxiety about a new disease, and what could happen can be overwhelming. It can trigger strong emotions and reactions. We know that public health measures such as physical distancing, masking, staying at home can make us feel isolated and lonely, which can fuel our anger, anxiety, and addiction, which is the subtitle of my book. The belief that COVID-19 restrictions are going to be temporary generate confusion and despair. One of the things that we're learning in the brain science research is that when there's no end in sight, when something feels unrelenting, it can actually aggravate our mental health and our happiness, because the brain actually has evolved to really seek safety, security, and stability, three concepts we'll talk about shortly. But the point being is that what is also taking place is that many of us are questioning what the future looks like. They talk about when is the normal coming back? Well, the normal is not coming back. We are going to have to deal with what we call a new normal. How can we begin to look at moving forward in such a way through growth and resilience? So I also want to make sure that we are aware that what's going on right now is what we can call trauma. All of us in some way, whether we are able to admit it or not, have experienced some form of trauma, whether that's through grief or loss. What's unique about trauma is that it can unfortunately present us to lose hope, inspiration, and joy. So everything I'm sharing with you today, we're going to talk a little bit now about what is the evolutionary trappings, if you will, or obstacles that might sabotage our happiness, and also go into some of the strategies we can begin to employ that really begin to cultivate long-term happiness in our lives. As Gopi mentioned, I have been teaching a happiness course at Chapman University for going on 9 years now. And in this happiness course, we really go deeply into what we call the 4 pillars of happiness, which are biological, psychological, social, and spiritual. And each of these will be discussed at some point in this presentation. So I want to talk to you about what I believe is called the rise in the disease of despair, what's going on right now. And this, you can see from this chart, this is actually came from The Economist. In 2016, The Economist had this article that they produced, and in it, they were looking at why is it that the suicide rates in the United States have increased. Now, I mentioned to you earlier my personal story around suicide for my mother having died from suicide in my 20s. I also want to share with you, I've struggled with my mental health and well-being, in the aftermath of that trauma. But there is hope in the sense that we can overcome what's going on right now. But this is a disturbing trend. What's taking place is that the rise in suicide rates are increasing, not just in the United States, but around the world. And they've actually shown that the largest increase in suicide is with the younger generation. There is, as an educator or as a parent, even for that matter, this is truly alarming. So what I want to share with you are some statistics that have come out of the October 2020's American Psychological Association. It is this understanding that on the right side, you can see over here, about 80% of college students or Gen Z adult college students say their education is a significant source of stress. especially now more so with online learning and technology. There's a lot of anxiety about the future. 67% of college students report there's a sense of feeling hopelessness or despair. It's almost like to say, back when, as administrators, our biggest concern is, how should I live my life? The question we're hearing now is, why should I live my life? And there's a big difference between how should I live my life and why should I live my life. A growing sense of despair. You can even see on the left column over here, 6 in 10 Gen Z adults, about 63%, say they have felt extremely lonely during the pandemic. The same number report negative impacts on the relationships. Nearly 3/4 of Gen Z adults report negative health impacts due to the pandemic, whether that's through disrupted sleep, eating unhealthily, weight changes. But 80% of Gen Z say they could have used more emotional support. So the work that I do along with my colleagues at Chapman University and at the Fish Interface Center, where I'm a director, we really look at caring for the needs of the entire person, whether it's the student or whether it is for the individual. So webinars or forums like this really are wonderful opportunities to advocate and to realize, number one, we need to remove the stigma around mental illness. More of us are experiencing mental illness, and there is no shame about talking about it. And so these will be more topics to talk. We can talk about maybe the Q&A or perhaps later on in further conversations. I want to kind of turn now to what we call the actual evolutionary neuroscience. I want to really share with you some of the research which has come out that really begins to share some of the brain science. Like, why our brains actually have evolved. When people ask me, Dr. J, why do I feel, what can I do to overcome my anxiety and stress? The first thing I say is, well, you're working against almost 100,000 years of evolution. Let's talk about this from the brain science perspective. I'm going to go a little bit into the neuroscience, but I hopefully this will be at a level that all of us can appreciate. Nothing, I think, beyond from what we can perhaps, I think, for this audience. But my book, Science of a Happy Brain, goes into much more detail into the brain science. But I'll say this, if you look at the image on the right, you'll see the amygdala. The amygdala is a part of what's called the mesolimbic or the primal brain, sometimes called the Stone Age brain or the tribal brain, or if you will, the primal or the primitive survival brain, if you will. What the amygdala does is that the amygdala is where our stress response system is basically situated. Now, it's interesting. You'll see that there is a small, the hippocampus, which is a very small gland, which resides very close. In fact, it actually sits right on top of the amygdala. The point being is that the amygdala controls our emotional responses and helps your brain store memories. It works very closely with the hippocampus. The hippocampus plays a role in long-term memory and where we begin to remember these stressful events. Now, what's unique about the relationship between the amygdala and the hippocampus, as you see over here, it's called STRON. The strongest, or if you want to say the shortest connection in the brain is between the amygdala and the hippocampus when it comes to remembering stressful experiences. Now, why would your brain do this? Why on earth would your brains like to say your brain is wired not for happiness, but for survival? Evolution favors you to be in a low-grade state of anxiety and survival. Let me kind of share with you an example of this. I want you to imagine yourself going back in time, say 10,000 years ago, and you were all by yourself. You were cold, you were hungry, you were tired, you were afraid, and all you wanted to do was to experience a warm cave, some food, some shelter, and to make it one more day. Now, all of us can probably imagine, survival was the name of the game 10,000 years ago. We actually, our brains or evolution, wired into our neurobiology a mechanism where we had to be in a constant state of suspicion, scarcity, or strife. We actually had to remember the negative experiences more strongly. It's a concept called your brain's negativity bias. A colloquial way of saying this is that your brain is like Velcro for negative thoughts. Your brain is like Teflon for positive thoughts. What does that mean? Your brain is like Velcro for negative thoughts. It means that your brain registers more strongly the negative experiences or threats in your environment. It had to. So you think about it in the context of thinking there was a lion in the bush and there wasn't one, or thinking there was no lion in the bush and there was one. Well, the latter could maybe mean death. But always thinking there were threats in our environment was a cunning way that nature got us to survive. By being in a constant state of low-grade anxiety or stress, this is how nature ensured our strategy for survival. There are some others we'll talk about, which are more positive, but this is the most, I think, difficult one. This is the connection between the amygdala and the hippocampus. The idea is that the strong connection is there. Now you see, but there's a weak connection between the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus. This is the part of the brain where where our prefrontal cortex, where we make our rational thinking, where we can rewire our brain. So there's a concept called neuroplasticity, the idea that our brain can rewire itself, but it takes practice. One of the biggest challenges that we are experiencing right now during the time of COVID is that more of us are registering or are functioning through our day through this primal neural mechanism, the amygdala and the hippocampus. So every little thing can seem threatening, can seem like a threat. We need to cultivate this this other connection, which tends to be weak, but through time can actually be increased. One of the many negative attributes around stress and anxiety is that it creates inflammation in the body. Well, what's bad about inflammation? Well, in some ways, inflammation can be good to fight off a virus or an infection. But prolonged stress or prolonged anxiety, unrelenting stress, increases the pro-inflammatory response system in your body. The greater the amount of inflammation you have in your body, the more, in the long term, weaker immune system. It can lead to cardiovascular issues, neurocognitive health. So there are a host of issues that can result from prolonged inflammation in the body. So we are living in an age of anxiety. Anxiety presents itself in many different ways, as you can see here, whether difficulty in sleep, whether it's struggling to pay attention. You may go through these and see, wow, I kind of experienced quite a few of these right now going on, which is normal. But anxiety is something which is different than stress. Think about it this way. Our minds are this beautiful, amazing pieces of evolution. But unfortunately, our minds have a very easy ability to project in the future and to dwell on the past. Very rarely are we grounded in the present moment. So anxiety tends to be the anticipation of stress, which is not in the present moment. So not knowing when we get a vaccine, or not knowing when COVID's going to end, or not knowing all these things are taking place can actually fuel our anxiety. But let's talk a little bit about, before we kind of talk about some of the strategies, let's go into what I call the brain science of resilience and thriving. We talked about a little bit about this, but here's 3 ways your brain sabotages your mental health and well-being. The first is change and uncertainty. Well, you think about in the context, again, of evolution, your brain actually evolved for seeking safety, security, and stability. And in the disruption of safety, security, and stability, our brains can go into states of anxiety. We abhor change and uncertainty. This is something that our brains despise, but this is something we have to get used to right now. And so there are tools, which we'll talk about, that can help us overcome the first bias, change and uncertainty. The second, your brain's negativity bias. I talked about it just earlier, but briefly to recap, our brains are actually are wired more strongly, if you will, for negative experiences than positive ones. The third one, social isolation. This is something I'm going to talk about in more detail, but we're recognizing something about the human brain, which has just been discovered in the past 20, 30 years. And that is your brain is fundamentally a social organ. And in the absence of strong social connections, your brain recognizes and feels pain in the same overlapping regions of your brain that process physical pain, which I'll talk about in just a bit. So let's talk about some of the strategies we can begin to use. The first strategy we can use to create the science of a happy brain is learn to be adaptive, not reactive. How do we train your brain from surviving to thriving? Well, that surviving brain, that primal brain, which is geared towards stress, mistrust, boredom, scarcity, failure, uncertainty. These are the things that can sabotage our happiness and our well-being, our productivity, our sense of joy, inspiration, and hope. We need to learn the tools to begin to go into a thriving brain: motivation, inspiration, cooperation, creativity, passion, confidence, and success. These are all possible. So the one thing I want to share with you is the next strategy is practice mental hygiene. Happiness is not a promise. Happiness is a practice. We have to practice the tools for a happy brain. It doesn't come naturally to us. Well, you think about this. Did it come to you naturally to learn how to ride a bicycle or drive a car or do surgery or practice engineering or write? It took time. So the same thing is true for any behavioral practice. And this is the key point about this series, behavioral health. Many of the issues that we're talking about here are behavioral health, are really around behavioral medicine, behavioral health. We can, by modifying our behaviors, we can begin to promote better health. So one of the things we can do, as I say, is by practicing some mental hygiene. We all know about the benefits of practicing proper physical hygiene, but practicing proper mental hygiene is also very important. So what might that look like? Well, the first thing I say is when your outside world feels out of control, learn to control your inside world. This is where meditation or mindfulness practices or practices that bring to the present moment. So what are the things we can't control? Well, we can't control the weather. We can't control if my technology just kind of acted up on me. I can't maybe do this, the slideshow that I wanted to do. We sometimes can't control other people's thoughts or behaviors. We can't control other people's actions. We can't control the future. When am I going to get my COVID vaccination? I want to get one, but I don't know when that's going to be. So what we have to do to navigate through these times of uncertainty and adversity is learn to practice how to control our inner world, our thoughts, our reactions. What can we control? We control our behaviors, our responses to situations. Rather than being reactive, how do we be adaptive and responsive? You know, Gopi can talk more about this, I'm sure, maybe the Q&A being from Google. But one thing we're finding in the research, especially as a university educator and administrator, is the challenges that social media or digital technology poses. You know, I like to say we are disconnected in an overconnected world. Well, as you might see, technology is a good thing right now when we're physical distancing, but we need to maybe learn how to unplug wisely. I'll share with you a strategy that I do. I try to one day every month to take, actually one day every week on a Saturday, to do a full, today being an exception, to do a full technology fast where I'm off social media. I turn my notifications off. I try to minimize even speaking. I try to really cleanse my mind, do some what I call some digital mindfulness. So learning even to maybe modify your social digital lifestyle to unplug wisely. Another strategy I really share with my students, which I think is really beneficial for us. Learn to focus on progress, not perfection. Now you're talking to someone who is a type A personality, who is really, really like just driven, you know, to focus on perfection, but I have to catch myself sometimes. We need to really focus on what we call the not so much the destination, but the direction. So in some ways you can say happiness isn't a destination, it's a direction. Focus on your progress. Maybe do one thing a day that maybe gets you to your goals, whether it's your health, Maybe you're trying to diet, exercise. There are many things, even change your thoughts, your actions, behaviors, maybe meditation. These are all things that happen progressively, but over time, they begin to actually have and make a difference. Now, I know Gopi said metals, so I'm going off the meds. This is actually from Gopi. Self-care. I think self-care, we have to realize self-care isn't selfish. Self-care is essential. Take your meds, which comes from Gopi, his first book, Meds, Mindful Breathing, Exercise, Diet, and Sleep. If you can't do all of these, maybe try one of these. Maybe do one of these starting today. What's one of these you can start doing to really focus on in your life by taking your meds? The third strategy, get your daily dose of vitamin S, vitamin social. Vitamin social is vitamin S. Vitamin social nourishes your social brain. One thing that I'm finding that the COVID crisis has revealed is that in times of crisis, it reminds us of how truly interconnected and interdependent we are on each other. We need to learn to invest in social capital, whether that's in the corporate world, the corporate boardroom, the living room, the classroom, or any place in your life. Investing in social capital is the key. Coping with stress together makes you, the people you care about, and your community happier and stronger. Connection is really key. No, it's okay not to be okay. It's okay that you need to turn to others if you're struggling. Don't hide it yourself in. I think there's a really negative, I think, cultural mind frame we have, at least in the Western society here, and probably other cultures as well, where we have to bottle things up. There's a shame around maybe talking about our mental struggles or psychological challenges. So open up and talk about them. Know that physical distancing isn't social distancing. We can still be there with each other, even virtually. And remember, you're not alone ever. You're always surrounded by care and support. I want to share with you in the last few minutes we have what I believe is one of the most revolutionary findings to come out of brain science research in the past 15, 30 years. And that's the idea of the social brain. The idea is simply this. I want you to think about this. If you remember going back to the example I said about, imagine going back in time 10,000 years ago to our ancient Stone Age tribe dwellers. You're all alone. You're hungry. You're cold. You're frightened. All you want is a warm case, some food, and some safety, security, and stability. Would your chances for survival increase to make it one more day if you had one other able-bodied person you trusted alongside you? Well, yeah, the answer is yes. Now imagine if you had 5, 20, 50. You now have the basis of what we call a tribe. I want you to think about it in this context. We humans are not the fastest of animals. We're not the strongest. We're not the tallest. We can't breathe underwater. We can't fly naturally. So what is the one winning strategy we humans excelled at that made us the top species on the planet? It is our ability to form into complex social networks and navigate the complex terrain of our social environment. To socialize is to survive, to tribe is to thrive. Evolution favored socialization as a strategy for survival. Well, we know this to be the case for any physical adaptation like opposable thumbs, walking upright, vocal cords. These enhance human survival. So socialization is the same thing. And I want to tell you something. We really are not we are more Homo socialis, social humans, than we are Homo sapiens, the intelligent humans. So an equation which still holds true today, going back 10,000 years ago, abandonment from your tribe, the people you cared about, this made you operate from your surviving brain, stress, anxiety, panic, because you had no other people to turn to. When we learn to attach to our tribe, or part of a loving tribe where we feel a sense of belonging, sense of attachment, this allows us to thrive. So this really is very important. The social brain is, in my regard, which is the foundation for my book, Science of a Happy Brain, one of the hidden missing pieces that really can begin to help us cultivate the science of a happy brain. Here's a bit of a research I want to share with you since I'm talking to, I think, to some of the science audience here. I want you to look at this image in the top, in the left-hand side. This is actually an image of an fMRI. Test subjects were put into the sophisticated brain scanning devices, and they wanted to measure what happens in the brain if we were to elicit some form of social exclusion. So they did this very fancy experiment where they tricked the person in the fMRI machine to believe that he or she was being no longer being able to participate in a virtual game of like toss the ball. So what they wanted to discover, what part of the brain fires when we experience either social exclusion, social isolation, loneliness, what we call social pain. This was remarkable. This study took place about 15 years ago. What they discovered is that the same region of your brain that experiences, whether it's social isolation, loneliness, social exclusion, is processed in the overlapping region of your brain that processes physical pain. The converse is also true. Your body has a system to regulate pain. And the same region of your brain that fires to regulate social pain overlaps the same region of your brain that regulates physical pain. Now, what does that all mean? Why would your brain have this interesting mechanism where social pain and physical pain are overlapping in terms of their processing and regulation? Well, it really is about this. Considerable evidence from human and animal research supports the hypothesis that physical and social pain rely on shared neural and neurobiological networks. Although surprising in some way, this co-opting of the primitive physical pain signal to indicate the possibility of broken social bonds highlights the critical role that social ties have played in the survival of our species. Let's put this in a really simple way of putting it. Your brain feels the pain from a broken bone just as equally as the pain from a broken bond. We are driven to have social connection. What COVID has done, social isolation, it has fueled that part of our brain that feels social pain. So it is real. It's not something just imaginary. It fundamentally boils down to this, the last two slides here, the need to be needed. There is no you without relationships and community. The social brain is driven by three primal needs: the need to feel value, belonging, and engagement. As you can see, the word community, the word unity is in community. And so the last slide I want to share with you, what I call the 4 C's of a happy brain before we go into Q&A. And these are the following, the 4 C's of a happy brain. The first C is comfort. Know that self-care isn't selfish. As I said earlier, do things that really bring you a sense of comfort, whether it's getting enough sleep, exercise, and diet. And you know what? These are things we have under our control. I know there are many things out of our control, but diet, exercise, sleep, meditation, these are all things we have under our control. Ground yourself in the present moment, whether that is through meditation, through deep breathing exercises, walking in nature. Exercise can be one of those, even playing with your dog or your kids, cooking, all things that bring you into the present moment and ground you. Again, focus on the progress, not perfection. The second C is contribution. You know why I love the word contribution? The word tribe, T-R-I-B without the E, is in the word contribution. Contribution literally means doing things for your tribe. Know that the science of a happy brain is knowing that do things in your life that bring you a sense of purpose or a sense of meaning. You know, it's not in terms of work, it's not just about the pursuit of money, it's also about the pursuit of meaning. See the bigger picture to all of this. You know, what's going on right now will pass. When looking at the bigger picture, it helps us kind of put a cognitive reframing to see that life overall is still pretty good. And know that everyone has value, especially now during times when where would we be without essential workers like the Amazon delivery person, or the mail carriers, or the people at the food stores, or cashiers. Think about everyone now who plays such a vital role to help you made it through this past year. The third C is connection. social bonding and shared experiences. That's what we're doing here right now. But know that this is very key. Create sustained community, and also reach out for support when you are struggling. And the fourth C is compassion. Make kindness contagious. Care, listen, empathy. We know we are really more wired for empathy and compassion than we are for enmity and for competition. Look at your vulnerability not as a weakness, but as a virtue. So again, the four C's of a happy brain, and we can talk more about this in the Q&A: comfort, contribution, connection, and compassion. And you can learn more about all of these in my book, Science of a Happy Brain, and in the online course, Investing in Happiness. So with that, I thank you for this brief presentation, and I would love to turn it back to Dr. Pankaj Vij and Gopi for our Q&A.
Awesome. Dr. J, thank you so much for that wonderful, wonderful presentation, and many points here that we can implement right away, starting tonight if we wanted to. And I also read a news article on Wall Street Journal recently. There was apparently a research that showed that if you walk in the nature, like you suggested, it can even reduce heart attacks. And they said, is walking in the nature the new 10,000 steps? So definitely. So let me ask a few questions, if I may. Dr. Vij, Gopi, feel free to jump in anytime. I'm going to ask the first question that is from Shivrama Bhatt here. If one is an atheist and doesn't believe in spirituality, what would you say to them? And I believe the question is about meditation. That's my interpretation. Feel free to answer it however you feel fit.
I want to share that I think there's a confusion between the words religion and spirituality. You know, I actually gave a talk yesterday to the entire Chapman University community around spiritual wellness as one of our 8 dimensions of wellness at Chapman. So I want to say this, you know, religion is an organized institutional form of expression to divine power that is unique and different, almost like how we have all of us speak our own language, if you will, to communicate, and each language is the way we speak to each other. I look at religion as a unique way each culture speaks to the divine. Spirituality is something completely different. Spirituality in the context of religious studies, or in the context of what I do in spiritual psychology, spirituality is your own unique personal belief systems about the world. Now, this can be, and all of us have this, even atheists have a personal belief system. Or now, when I say belief system, it doesn't mean a divine or a theological belief system. It's a belief system about life. What gives you purpose, what gives you a sense of meaning. This is spirituality. Well, it could be your work. It could be your kids. It could be, you know, whatever that is, like writing, creativity, art. These are all forms of spirituality. So spirituality is independent. Well, in some way, spirituality is independent of religion. So this is why I think we need to be very careful, or just not careful, we need to be very distinguish between these two confusing terms, religion and spirituality. Religiosity is institutionalized and unique to a specific culture, but spirituality is embedded into the human condition. It is about giving us a sense of purpose and meaning. And the last thing I'll say before I hand it up to Gopi, because I know he's got some, maybe he can talk more about the meditation, other aspects of it as well. Spirituality, for me, why it's so important right now, many of us are experiencing spiritual distress through COVID. Spiritual trauma can disrupt our anchors and our sense of safety and security. And fundamentally, we can grow from trauma and become more resilient by seeking the meaning behind our loss and grief. This is spirituality, which is independent from religion. So that's all I'll say on that. There's more I can say, but I'll stop there.
Thank you, Dr. J. So that's an amazing question and a source of a lot of confusion. And if I understand the question correctly, the person was asking, if I'm not religious or spiritual, or if a person is not religious or spiritual, can you still practice meditation? The answer is absolutely yes. It is true that many religious orders have a meditation practice, and lot of our meditation practices today may come from one of those. So there are the Trappist monks in the Christian tradition, or various Hindu practices, Buddhist practices. Religious orders have meditation as a very integral part of the daily practice. But meditation does not have to necessarily have a spiritual or religious context. It can have a completely secular context. And it shows up now in the Western world in the form of mindfulness-based stress reduction that John Kabat-Zinn talks about, or mindfulness as a concept. And the two can exist separately. My own personal practice does come from a very religious tradition, but that is my personal choice. That's what I was inducted to when I was 19, and I continue to practice it. But when I practice it at Google, it does not have those characteristics. That's my personal practice. So in fact, a Google engineer, Chad Mentan, studied this and realized that meditation can be used as a tool to raise emotional intelligence. And he developed a program called Search Inside Yourself, which is now a course and a program at Google. It's actually one of the most popular training courses. And every day, there are meditation groups that sit at Google. We start many of our meetings with a little meditation practice, and I've led them. And we can do that without a connotation of religion or spirituality. You can add that and use it as a spiritual practice, as a religious practice. But it can also be used as a mainly mind-body neurophysical practice. The idea behind meditation, I would ask the questioner to consider, is think of it as creating some kind of spaciousness in your mind, in your brain. And you could meditate or when you're making a cup of tea and you're sitting quietly in your garden and sipping, or if you walk with great awareness in nature, as Praveen was talking about earlier, that could be a meditative practice as well. And it need not be connected with religion or spiritual, although it can be, and we are grateful for those traditions to have actually given us this gift of many, many different meditation practices. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gopi and Dr. J, for answering those questions. So Shivarama, the question was answered based on meditation. So if your question was different, feel free to ask the question again. So I want to also announce that we have in the house Mahavir Sharma, ex-chair of TiE Global, and we also have Executive Director of TiE Global, Vijay Menon, in the room. And I'll be inviting Mahavir to speak in a few minutes. So the next question I have is from DS Chauhan. And again, either of you can take this question, Gopi, J, you guys know better who can answer this. Why is there a tendency of suicide in males more than in females? Does it basically mean that women are more content and happy compared to males?
I can take the first answer to that. That's a great question. And I think we have to look at it in this way. The studies are showing, and I think the slide I said earlier, that I presented earlier on, show that there's been an increase in suicide ideation and suicide tendencies. It's not quite as clear in terms of why more men are prone to suicide ideation. But here's one hypothesis that's coming out. Women tend to have stronger social networks and support systems where they feel more inclined to reach out when they're struggling. Now it's being very generic. I know maybe sounds a little more, gender biased, but women tend to feel that they have permission to reach out for support. Exceptions, my mom, as I mentioned, died from suicide. So it's not just, it's not saying it's a generic thing for everyone. But I do see that what they've shown is that men tend to feel the greater sense of pressure for supporting the family or supporting, being like the bedrock, if you will. There's sometimes a sense when men, and I'm interesting enough, I'll be talking on a panel on male South Asian health, mental health, in a couple of weeks, specifically around this topic on mental health and shame and maybe reaching out. But the point being is that there's not an easy answer to this question. Men, what we do know is that the means by which more men die from suicide are by firearms. Women tend to do it, to be more blunt, by more benign means, maybe through taking overdose or through medication, if you will, pills. The point is that we're now finding in the younger generation, and this is the sad piece, more girls are dying from or have suicide ideation. So we're seeing that it's in the younger generation, Gen Z and college students, in America at least, it seems to be pretty even. So this idea is that we can't really make this gender assumption bias that it's predominantly just women. We can't say women are happy. I think that would be a very that would the logic that the data wouldn't suggest that the women were happy. What we can say is that women feel more inclined to reach out for support. They can still be equally depressed or have depression, anxiety, or mental behavioral issues, but men seem, whether it's cultural, gender, for whatever reason, socioeconomic, men tend to feel there's greater stigma and a sense of feeling that they don't have support systems. And this is one thing I will say, if you poll men and women even today, most men today say they have on average less than 2 best friends. Women will say they have over 5.
Guys, Gopi would like to leave a little sooner. So I'm going to take a few questions that I think are more relevant to Gopi. So Gopi, this question is from Sonal Desai. Is it possible to have a thoughtless mind?
For most people, I don't believe so. I am told, again, by reading all the history of this whole process, that there is an end state where you reach a stillness of the mind, a superconscious state. But given my own situation or the people I'm surrounded with, I'd say that might be an eventual goal. But for the most part, it's not a thoughtless mind that you are trying to, but 2 aspects of it. One is to slow down the racing mind. And these practices help you just slow that down a little bit more, the pacing of all of the thought process. And second, as Jay mentioned, as these thoughts come, you don't react to it, you don't get triggered by it. You know how to process it. And you learn to separate your thinking mind and its crazy stream of thoughts away from what is your life all about, a reality. So it's not so much about a thoughtless mind, but witnessing that crazy thought process and using some of these processes, especially meditation or any mindful-based activity, to reduce it and slow it down so that you don't feel wrecked by it all the time. Jay, do you have another perspective on it? That's a very complex philosophical question. That's why it's like hesitant, and I'm still developing my own thinking around it. In fact, right now, I'm reading the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, where I think he's done one of the best jobs in analyzing what goes on in the mind and espousing it. But it's a dense, impenetrable text, and I think it'll take years of study and thinking before I figure out that perfect answer.
Right.
But Jay, as a researcher on the brain, what's your thoughts?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the Yoga Sutras. Most people might know the second line of the Yoga Sutras, Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha. It's the idea that translation into a rough translation of Yoga Chitta Vritti Nirodha is this idea that the goal of yoga is to quiet the turning of thoughts. A bold endeavor, whether we reach it, who knows? This is where yoga psychology and even Buddhist psychology or spiritual psychology is a new form of psychology which is coming into practice, whether it's Buddhist yoga or spiritual psychology. From the Buddhist perspective, I can say this idea, which ties into yoga psychology. It's understanding that everything in life is impermanent. Nothing lasts forever, including your thoughts. So you might notice that a thought that comes in or something which is distracting you, well, one way to recognize this is to first begin by reminding yourself, this is a fleeting thought. I'm not this thought. This thought is not me. It is just something that's passing through the terrain of my psyche or my mind, if you will. And so when we begin to do that as the first step, this can help us, the second step, which is called detachment or decoupling, where we actually can see the thought as something which is in our what's called our meta consciousness. We see it as separate from us. okay, this is where mindfulness practice comes in, or yoga, yoga not as a physical hatha yoga practice, but as the psychosocial spiritual practice of yoga. The idea that the goal of yoga, if it's not to quiet the thoughts in the mind, it really is to recognize that the thoughts are there, and we don't identify with the thoughts, and say that our thoughts don't control us. And the moment we can recognize that, there's a concept in neuropsychology now called metaconsciousness, where you can begin to see the thought for what it is. And by just seeing the thought for what it is, we don't become imprisoned by it.
Another perspective I'll add to that is that often when I lead meditations at Google or other places, or beginning meditators will say that I'm frustrated, I couldn't stop my thinking mind. It's not so much as to stop it, but as Jay said, to witness it. And one aspect of that over years of meditation, I realized is so much of my thinking, so much of our thinking is about being anxious about a future that is not yet here, about things we worry about it, or dwelling over something that happened in the past. It's okay to think about it and reflect on something, but the 16th time when you hash out the same story and elaborate it and build fantasies around it, it's no longer serving you. And I find that the process of meditation not so much as reduces those thoughts, but stops you from that constant ruminations about a future that is not yet here you're worrying about, or a past, and spend more time being present and centered in what's in front of you. So when you're in a meeting, your mind is not run away. You're still in the meeting, listening to the presenter. And you're still thinking, but you're thinking about what is being discussed as opposed to thinking about something else.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you for that, Dr. Jay and Gopi. I'll add my perspective on this. I've been trying to meditate regularly. My longest stretch without breaking was 107 days. So I've been on and off, but there were times where I did extensive stretches of meditation. And one thing that I don't know if this is thoughtlessness, but just like you explained, Dr. Jay, is like when a thought comes, how can you make it temporary and recognize that and stop thinking? So what I can now do is, as soon as a thought comes, I can automatically recognize and stop it. It's almost like when you're walking on a rope, you kind of balance it. So I kind of make a balance. I don't know how to explain this. This balance where I'm stopping the thinking, but it's not still. I'm still trying to get to that stillness. I'm not there. And one thing that helped me is they say focus on the third eye. So when we try to focus on third eye, usually, at least in my case, I used to focus here. But if I keep my finger in the middle of the forehead, which is where our prefrontal cortex is, and then practice that meditation, focusing there, that helped me to get more stillness. I don't know. So anyway, so with that, here's what I'd like to do. I would love to welcome Mahavir Sharma, ex-chair of TiE Global, to say a couple of words, and then I'll jump back to questions. Mahavir, please welcome.
Thank you, Praveen. Excellent topic, excellent speakers, and it's always good to hear what Gopi has to say, and we connected post the last event. I think it's always enlightening to hear today. Dr. Jay, excellent talk. And just to add my perspective and talk on the anxiety part of it, and many people not knowing when being passionate and stressed, and when anxiety kicks in, people don't realize that. And I think, and I also believe that meditation is a constant state of mind. It's not sitting and meditating if you are not in control of your mind and focused, and you don't have your mind, in what I call it, compartmentalized, where there's work stress and there's family, and I don't let one compartment bother the other. So in my mind, I'm always at peace in some part, and that's what I do. I mean, I don't know if it's right or wrong, but it's always helped me stay calm under stress and still be able to deliver what needs to deliver. Excellent talk. And if anyone wants to add to what I've said, I'd be happy to listen to. Go on, Praveen. Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Very well said, Mahavir. Thank you so much for that. With this, I'd love to invite Naren Bakshiji. He is one of the co-founders of CWC to say a few words. He has a couple of minutes where he can share his message.
So first of all, so delighted to see Gopi, yourself, and Jay. Jay, I had a long chat with you for an hour almost. Got to know you so well. So that's wonderful. The thing I want to tell you is this year is the first year after 55 years. I have been in India for 14 months. Now, I could have taken it very negatively, but it turned out to be a great year, mainly because I found a new purpose. We wanted to do something in India someday, but it got accelerated. Accelerated in the sense, Mahavir knows this all. We built a backend team, and did an experiment for 7 webinars and realized that there was a very big opportunity and time is right. So I'm delighted that we can take positive steps, even though there are difficulties. The other thing that happened, we have been talking about meditation. This is the first year where I've been doing Vipassana meditation 1 hour a day, almost 5-6 days a week, which I had never done before. So things can be very positive even in difficult times. So I want to thank both of you. And of course, Dr. Vij, without whom we wouldn't be here, and Som and Raj Desai may not be here, but the team has done a phenomenal job. I'm far away, but still working for CWC India initiative. And we are building a wellness resource center. So my question to both of you, one last question, is people do talk about wellness. And one thing we did not mention today was financial wellness. And what I'm finding out, and this is a question that I think we should all reflect on, the question is, are people in India more happy or not? And if with all the meditation, yoga, and these things coming from Eastern, is it possible that poverty is another factor that is missing? So Gopi, your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I just spoke about this on Thursday, actually at Google, where I also teach a course on financial wellness. And in the course, I started by talking about health, and everyone said they want to be healthy. And for me, health has 5 dimensions. Usually we think of health as just physical health, but that is just one of 5 dimensions. For me, health is, there's physical health where your musculoskeletal system and organs are in a peak state and high performing. There's mental health, your cognitive function, your thought process working well. There is emotional health, your thoughts and feelings in response to the situation are healthy and positive. There is spiritual health, again, your sense of connection to something that is larger than yourself, that gives you meaning and purpose as to what you're doing in this world and your relationship with everyone else and the whole planet. And the 5th is financial health, because money is indeed a life energy that flows through it. And if it's managed well, it serves you so that you can live a life of purpose and passion. And if it's not, it's a cause of great stress as that happens. So yes, absolutely, financial wellness is an important dimension to consider. Now, this question of are people in India any happier? That's a hard one to answer. There are surveys like how Bhutan does the, measures its happiness, and there are various organizations that measure how happy people are. And depending on how the survey is constructed, one country may be happier or the or less happy than the other. But for me, it is less important about a country. It's more at the individual level. And a lot of what Jay was talking about, he said happiness is not something that happens to you. It is a practice. And that practice is available to everyone, because much of what Jay spoke about is accessible to anyone. So in that sense, whether you're happy or not, you can become happier than where you are. And Dan Buettner is another person researching it, where he says you can become happier by changing some habits and changing the environment. And these are choices that we can make. We have the ability, the power to make those choices. Jay, anything to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Gopi. Yes, so at Chapman, we actually, a part of a team that I helped to create, we look at health and wellness through 8 dimensions, so 3 more than Gopi just said. So we have the 5 that Gopi mentioned: physical, emotional, financial, spiritual, social. We also have intellectual, occupational, and environmental wellness. So we looked at these eight dimensions, and they all need to be cultivated. So getting on to one thing that Dr. Sharma, Mr. Sharma, Mahavir Sharma said, this idea that what meditation does, and I'll answer Mr. Bakshi's question about poverty and issues. What meditation does, and I showed the slide earlier on about the strong connection between the amygdala and the hippocampus, and the weaker connection between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. What meditation practices do is they help to build that weaker connection. The connection that's generally neurobiologically weaker, that now becomes the new pathway. So anxiety and stress reinforce that short circuit, that short pathway between the amygdala and the hippocampus. But with training and practice, that's what mindfulness does. In fact, it's the work that I do. We apply the 4 C's: comfort, contribution, connection, and compassion into resilient leadership, into entrepreneurship, into organizational structures, into corporate environments, but also into society. So this segues into what Mr. Bakshi was saying about money and economies, and I think we're looking more so at economics and happiness is I think what I'm really getting at here. So finances on the individual is there, but all the surveys come out that says if the society itself is not feeling a sense of economic prosperity, there tends to be a greater decrease in happiness. There are exceptions. What is that exception? Countries that have stronger social networks and family support systems. Countries that have where the support systems are helped, the network systems are put into place, the safety nets are put into place. Whether they're there from by the culture, like in India, there's strong family support systems, or in countries like Scandinavian countries where there are great governmental networks put into place. This is what we're seeing taking place. So it's a complex question. It's the reason why a country like Costa Rica is ranked higher in happiness than the United States. Well, why is that? Well, there tends to be a greater focus on the family, education, access to healthcare is stronger. So there are many factors that go into prosperity of a country beyond just individual finances. There's the socioeconomic constructs that are embedded into the culture of the society. It's actually a part of my research that I'm doing as well. So I can talk more about them maybe on a different topic, a different time.
Awesome. Dr. J, thank you. I want to acknowledge and thank Gopi for joining today's session. Gopi, of course, you're welcome to stay as long as you'd like, but if just in case you leave because you said you needed to leave early, I want to thank you, appreciate your time, and for being a great ambassador for CWC. And I'm going to jump to questions. We still have several questions that need to be answered. Dr. J, thank you for staying. So we can probably move faster on these questions so that we can get all these questions answered. One question is from Liz Bullen. So this maybe hopefully bring some business to you. What do your enterprise happiness programs look like? And how do you measure success of those programs, I believe?
That's a great question, Liz. So the online course that I have, Investing in Happiness, looks at the 4 C's: comfort, contribution, connection, and compassion, begins to apply that into corporate settings. And one thing we're discovering is that when we talk about measurements, there are things we can do in terms of, well, there's financial, but there's also look at employee engagement. That's, I think, the big one that I'm really focused on: workplace wellness and employee engagement, retention rates. Do you have, what's your sick time leave? So there are tangible measurements we can do. What's the turnaround? Do you have a lot of people what's the retention rate in your company? How many people are taking sick days? How many people are not feeling engaged? There's a whole webinar just on this we could do, just on looking at workplace wellness and engagement and how to enhance corporate success. So the short answer to this is that there are measurements that we do, or that I look at. The first thing starts with I just give a talk to the company. So whether it's what the company is, I give a general talk, and then from there we kind of go into deeper discussions and conversations of putting together platforms and longer term programs. And you're
Awesome.
welcome to contact me separately. I'll put my email in the chat box if anyone wants to reach out to me.
Definitely. And feel free to search as well, Dr. Jay Kumar, the happiness professor. So awesome. So next question is from an anonymous attendee. How can you help someone who has cognitive impairment and doesn't have any motivation?
Yes, that is a great question. And this is really going into the realm that's beyond just behavioral, get into neurocognitive as well. So we should really be aware that when we talk about the brain, we have to be aware we can talk about it through the lens of mental, emotional, behavioral, as well as neurocognitive. Now they can overlap. So what do you do with someone's lack of motivation, someone who just doesn't feel a sense of will to live? Well, there could be issues that around trauma. There could, I mean, I don't know this. It's not easy for me to answer the question without knowing the specifics behind it. But there could be various reasons that can manifest as lack of motivation, which have primary sources. The motivation, what I'm trying to get, can be a secondary expression of a deeper primal issue that may be undiagnosed. So I'm not here to diagnose. I'm not here to give the specifics on this idea, but I guess the one thing I'll say is that we have to recognize that there could be deeper issues that are more primal, like trauma or other things that are happening in the person's life that could manifest as secondary behavioral patterns, such as lack of motivation and feeling a lack of inspiration or joy.
Yeah, definitely. And
and even neurochemical, I should say, as well as neurochemical.
Got it. Well, in this particular question, the person said that this person has cognitive impairment. Minus that impairment, definitely having better ambitions, better goals, and like you said, working towards something bigger than yourself could create motivation as well, if it's purely behavioral. So
yeah, and I think the short answer to the question is volunteer work. Do something. If the person has able to do volunteer work, just do charity volunteer work. They're finding the brain science research, all the research is coming out, when people who do acts of kindness, who are the agents of altruism, they actually have long-term health benefits that last for quite a while. So the short answer is volunteer work, if that's something that person can do.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, if you go and see people who are in worse situations than you. I was in Africa, for example, where there was this school where they didn't have any walls. All that they had was sticks, all around this. They thought that was a room. It was not even a room, right? So when you see situations like that where people are living in much worse situations, then you want to help them, like you said, volunteer and help, and then your pains go away in many ways. So thank you. So this question is from Sudhakaran, and definitely unplugging from toxic situations wisely is great, right? But what if you have to remain in a toxic situation or relationship? How can you remain in that, which are inevitable, and manage the situation?
That's a great question. And, unfortunately, sometimes we don't have the opportunity to leave toxic relationships. Perhaps if you're a child or someone who's maybe a coworker or something. As I said earlier, you can't control other people's behaviors and thoughts. You can't. What you can control is your reaction, your responses to them. This is challenging, but here's what I like to do when I'm in a toxic situation or I'm dealing with someone who's difficult, whether it's a student or a coworker or a family member, etc. We have to recognize that all of us right now are struggling, and to give a little, like leeway to some people. But I think the bottom line is this: you can't control what other people are going to behave and react. Now, if the situation is a danger to you, like a physical danger, then that's an issue. Clearly, if your physical health or your physical safety is in danger from this toxic relationship, then that's an issue where, you know, we have to, some action needs to be taken. But sometimes if you're in a toxic relationship, if there's not an option to leave, maybe ask yourself, how do I, as even though I can't change this person's behaviors, what can I do in some way to reframe the thinking around this? What is perhaps causing the person to react in this way? Not saying that you are the person to blame the person to act this way, but knowing that, you know, this person's acting this way because this person might be going through some struggles in life. Or might be having some other challenges, and it could just be something that is part of their emotional psychological makeup. But the point being is that, and as hard as it is, it's important to recognize that you are not the contributor. You are not the person responsible ultimately for that person's behaviors. You are responsible for your own behaviors and how you want to respond to it. Again, it's unique to each person. So whether the talk, if it's a relationship at work, well, that can be easily modified by talking to someone in HR. You know, if it's something as a family member, are there other people in your family you can talk to about this? Are there other people in your family who are also experiencing this? Is there a way you can begin to rely on each other? Are there people you can rely on to help you and support you when you find yourself in these toxic situations?
So this question is from Mala, Mala Bala. How do you motivate a person to build a social circle who doesn't proactively prefer to socialize?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a great question. I think we have to really recognize there's a difference between being an introvert and extrovert. Has nothing to do, really is independent from the idea for social connection. I'm going to say that I speak to, you know, it's my job to speak to people like this in just my life, but I am a powerful introvert. So I want to say this idea is that being an introvert doesn't mean that you don't enjoy social connection. How you recharge is maybe internally. So even someone who might be labeled as an introvert, we still need those social connections. It can be something maybe one-on-one. You know, introverts don't do so well being in large groups as extroverts. You know, I learned to be an extrovert, put it that way. I learned to live in an extrovert's world, to be more frank. But I'm really introvert. But the point being is that even if people who are labeled introverts or find themselves more introspective, we can maybe still engage through social connections in small doses. Maybe it's one-on-one. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's taking a walk in the park. You know, maybe just be calling someone on the phone. But there are ways we can still nurture our social brain, despite whether we find ourselves being introverts or extroverts.
Thank you. And this question is from an anonymous attendee. And this person gets dreams about past psychologically traumatic incidences around 3 o'clock in the morning. And this person wakes up with heart palpitations and sweating and butterflies in that person's stomach. They want to forget about it. And what can they do about it?
Well, my first suggestion is, if this is something which is chronic, and if this is, again, we're not here to give medical advice, so I have to be very mindful about not giving specific medical advice. My first suggestion is, do you have a person you can talk to, like a licensed clinical psychologist or psychiatrist? You might, if there's a possibility, even see, could there be something, you know, maybe neurobiological taking place. You know, one thing we're finding, there's a strong connection between the gut, the gut, a digestion. You know, are there certain things that you're eating that maybe aggravate you in the nighttime? There's no one quick fix answer to this question, but what I would suggest to the person who's anonymous is, can you reach out to someone who is a clinical licensed psychiatrist, psychologist, and talk about this? Again, I'm not giving medical advice here. It's very possible there could be unresolved buried trauma that may be unconscious, that the reason why it's taking place the same time at 3 o'clock, that for me is not something I qualify to really have an answer to. But the fact that it's chronic and that it's been something which you've been experiencing repeatedly likely indicates that it is an expression of some underlying trauma that needs to be brought up in a safe environment with a therapist or psychologist or clinician.
Awesome. With that, Dr. Jay Kumar, thank you so much for your time. You stayed extra. I know you came early to the meeting, so it's almost been 2 hours. So guys, I know there are a couple more questions. Feel free to reach out to Dr. Jay directly in respecting of his abundance of time that he has given to us. I'd like to thank you, appreciate you. Attendees, I see that almost 70%, more than 70% of the people are still here. So that shows how much value they're getting, Dr. Jay. That means a lot about the value of this knowledge that you shared today. So thank you so much, everyone. Please do register for the future events, and I'll see you on another day. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.